The meeting is now called to order. It is December 14th, 2022, and the time is 6:37 p.m. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. And Al, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I would love to. I pledge to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then can you please call roll?
Scott Andreasen.
Here.
Natalie Copeland.
Here.
Holt. Shannon Hawes.
Here.
And Monica Segura Schwartz and Les Green are not with us here tonight. The following cabinet members and staff are present at the District Administration Office. Superintendent Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education Kay Nelson, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education Dr. Mike Rivard, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching Lori Posch, Executive Director of Operations Gary Ganji, Media Technicians Paul Novak and Gordy Scott, and our custodian on site is Steve Hain. The following cabinet members are virtually present. Director of Community Engagement and Communications Tammy DeLand, Director of Equity Services Ian Omar, Director of Innovation and Instructional Technology Ryan Cox, Executive Director of Community Education Adam Holm, Executive Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations Tracy Flynn Bowe, Executive Director of Research, Assessments and Enrollment Donna Roper, Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education Carol Potter, and Executive Assistant Jan McGuire. One correction, Tracy Flynn Bowe is not attending this evening's meeting.
Thank you. Next, I'm looking for a motion to approve the Board of Education meeting agenda.
Second.
I have a motion by Scott and a second by Natalie. Al, would you please call vote?
Andreasen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Al Dahlgren is yes. Zach Dorholt, Shannon Hawes.
Yes. Then we have the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of minutes from November 2nd, 2022 and November 16, 2022. Item B, approval of bills and other financial transactions in the grand total amount of $4,602,816.86. Item C, approval of personnel staff changes. Item D, acceptance of grant awards and donations. Item E, Catherine Johnson Education Center project change orders totaling a negative $20,475.57. And I said negative, I'm assuming that's a credit. Okay. And then item F, a call for bids, Apollo Stadium improvements. Does any board member wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Okay, looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as read.
So move.
And do I have a second? I have a motion by Scott, a second by Natalie. Al, can you please call vote?
Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Zach Dorholt. Al Dahlgren is yes.
Thank you. Moving on to information items. First up, we have South Junior High School presentation. Welcome, Principal Joel Heidenkamp. Good to see you.
All right, good evening, Board Chair Hawes, Superintendent Putnam, board members and cabinet members. It's my pleasure this evening to share an update from South Junior High. We've got some fantastic things happening and excited to be here this evening. The information that I'd like to provide this evening comes straight from our school improvement plan, continuous improvement plan. And we chose 3 focus areas off of the strategic plan. These were, both the focus areas and the focus objectives were decided in conjunction with our building leadership team. And so the information that you're seeing this evening is a collaborative effort amongst lots of individuals from school. We looked specifically in focus area 1, positive climate and culture, focus objective 1.1A and 1.2B, both integrating social emotional learning and expanding student voice within and throughout our learning community. The first one of 4 in this area that I'd like to specifically just call out is our monthly PBIS student recognition. The picture you see there on the right side are our September students of the month. And not only do we highlight these students by calling their name, we have a live stream where they get to be showcased amongst the entire building. They come through my office once a month with our entire administrative team, and we celebrate these folks. We have a certificate that they get, but it gets posted and presented throughout the course of the month in a showcase in that main hallway, and then we make sure that, again, they get recognized again at our end of trimester celebration, which is coming up for us here just this next coming week. We do a weekly recognition. We call these Tiger Joy Bombs. We do those every Friday. These are chosen by, again, our administrative team. Each week we pick a handful of people or a handful of groups, and we make sure that we call out all of the great things that they're doing throughout the course of their day with our students and with our staff. And so, again, on the right-hand side, you'll see Miss Velva Pennington in just a little bit in our South Together video. Her and Beth Gerke there on that top picture, they run our student support room. And so we gave them a shout out early on in the year for setting that space up and being available for all of our students. And on the bottom, that's Miss Strite on the bottom left and Miss Garrett's in the middle. They are co-teaching a Sunday intervention that I know you heard lots about last week at the meeting. And they're doing some great things with providing some tiered levels of support in that area. And so with their flexibility in scheduling and working with lots of groups of students and doing some outside the box teaching, we made sure to give them a shout out. This is one that I'm pretty proud of. We implemented this halfway through the year last year, kind of taking the Orange Frog initiative of the district to another level. We bought a couple of orange frogs off Amazon and decided that we were going to have the traveling orange frog. And we implemented it from day 1 this year. And so the process looks like this. At the first week of the year, myself and Assistant Principal Stone each chose to give the orange frog away. I chose to give my orange frog to our counseling team as they worked super hard in August to make sure that we were ready for the start of the school year. And she chose to give her orange frog to Julie Granberg there on the bottom she's our academic coach, and she was working so well with getting our new teachers to the building, being their mentor, getting ready for the school year. And so you can see they not only get the orange frog for the week, but they get their recognition postcard there as well. The key now is that once that orange frog gets given away, that staff member now has to find another person to give it to. And so I'm just the conduit each week to pass it along and make sure that we highlight these folks in our staff and parent newsletters, but the staff are giving them away and calling out all the great things that each other are doing throughout the course of the school year. The last one that I want to call around positive culture and climate goes in line with our teaming that we do. We have 2 teams of students in each grade level. These are about 150 students that all have the same core teacher, which provides us the opportunity to have some collaboration with teachers and have some common expectations within their spaces. It also allows us to bring students together and have a common conversation where we have all the teachers and all the students together in one space. And so the pictures you see there are our 2 7th grade teams. We just wrapped up 6 team meetings. We do them during advisory. And For our trimester 1 check-ins, we celebrated birthdays from the first 3 months. We shouted out all the students that participated in activities and sports. We gave some opportunities for students to ask questions of how and provide some insights of how it had been going over the first trimester. And then we gave some overall general school expectations and some check-in items that we felt they needed to have moving forward. And it's just been such a great opportunity for us to have those common conversations, because we now know that as these students move throughout their day, they're hearing the same message and the same themes from all of their teachers. And so it's been really great for us to re-implement teaming back at South Junior High. Focus Area 2, instruction that produces positive outcomes. As a leadership team, we chose 2.1A, ensuring all instruction and programming are culturally relevant and engaging, and also 2.2A, providing multiple means for professional learning opportunities. And so just to call out a couple of them, I'd like to share 2 platforms that we're using at South Junior High, one of them being called Pear Deck. We utilize some of our Title I funding to purchase this, and it's just such a great way to have another means to engage learners in the space. And so the screenshot you see there came straight from Ms. Klug, one of our 6th grade science teachers, and you can see they've been talking about plate motion and some of those other earth science topics, and just another way to engage the brain, right? We're not just talking about it now, we're not just writing about it, but now we're also drawing about it. And so students can have their own screen on their Chromebook, and they're drawing 2 things they already know about the topic of plate motion, something that they'd already been talking about. Just another example from Pear Deck. Again, not only now engaging other parts of the brain, but now we're also incorporating some of those college and career readiness pieces that has been such a focus for us. And so taking it another step further and talking about both geology and paleontology. And so I've got to witness this where students are up and moving around and having conversation based on this one single question. It's been pretty cool to see in the classroom. Edpuzzle is the other one that I'd like to call out, and this is something that's secondary wide. As a secondary administrative team, we've chosen to purchase this together. And so each one of our schools have this, and all of our teachers have access. Another way to keep students engaged, and the cool thing about Edpuzzle, if you can see along the bottom, it's really hard to see, but at the bottom of that screenshot, there's little dots underneath that orange screen. And those are checkpoints for learning. So as the student is watching the Edpuzzle information, it'll stop them and it'll force them to engage in that learning, reflect on something that they had just seen, heard, or read, and it doesn't allow them to move on until they can. It also allows you to embed video. So you can see this is Ms. Klug again in 6th grade science. She's not only just showing the information, but she's also there with them. The other cool piece of this is it's now archived. It's recorded, it's something that can be posted, it's something that can be revisited as many times as a student needs to. And we've been able to utilize these in our Tiger Time or Win Time on Wednesdays as well, where if a student misses, or in this case, these are expectations that were given early on in the year, as a student joins her space, maybe joins school a few months into it, she's able to reference this piece that was given in September, and the student has the same access to the information that was given to start. For staff, this is just a call out around some of our monthly professional development. Again, I know it's hard to see, but I just wanted to highlight, as a district, we provide professional learning for all of our teachers on the first Wednesday of the month during our morning meetings. At South, we've taken it one step further with our academic coach. We offer some optional professional development every Tuesday morning. That starts at 7:55. It's about a 20-minute chunk of something that the teachers have either told us they need or we feel has been coming up as a need for them. So this was our December staff calendar here. I'll just call it out because it's so hard to see. It's highlighted on the Tuesday column. The first Tuesday this month, we did license renewal. The second one, just this week, was a mentor-mentee check-in with the academic coach and new teachers to the building or new teachers to the profession. And then next week, we're kind of diving into a new piece of, lost it here for a second, modern classroom or blended learning, which is taking Edpuzzle to the next level of providing small group instruction in the classroom with the embedded videos or learning that can happen, allowing the teacher to work more on a more focused level with smaller groups on exactly what they need. The last area was Focus Area 5, Family and Community Engagement. again, chosen through our leadership team. 5.1A, creating school-based connections that bring families and educators together, and then also creating systems and procedures to provide access for all students and families. A couple of call-outs here for us. I know that Assistant Superintendent Nelson shared a little bit about our Family One engagement event last week, but we did a first ever partnership with Tech High School. We did a Southside Fall engagement, and this event really was one of the coolest things I'd been a part of in a while. Over 200 people enjoyed bingo. You can see the picture on the top are some middle school students engaged in our college and career area at Tech High School. At the bottom, we did music exploration with steel drums and ukuleles. We had an art room, we had food, we had robotics. We really provided a huge opportunity for students to engage in lots of different ways that evening, and it was really, really fun to be a part of. The second one that you'll get a little more depth on with our South Together video, so I'm not going to go in too much depth, is our 8th grade web crew. Getting those students involved has again been a part of South for a really long time, all the way back to Superintendent Putnam's days as a counselor. But we had 60 students that chose to come into school in August and do a 2-day orientation to get ready for the school year. These students came in on the first day of school for 6th grade. They provided the orientation opportunity to allow students to meet students they maybe didn't know from other schools, get to know the building, and just get that overall comfortability. Throughout the course of the year, we do different check-ins through our advisory program with these students, and then you'll see in the video they've taken it to another level of engaging in the greater community at South, and so I'm not going to share too much there because you'll see that here in just a minute. Two fairly significant district office partnerships I just wanted to shout out. First one with our learning and teaching team and the implementation of our Win Time or Tiger Time. We've been able to do things with that time that we hadn't been possible previously. A greater work completion opportunity for students, retakes and reteaching that happens in the morning. Music lessons, bringing those back for students to have that extra scoop in a smaller setting with our music teachers. The web crew leadership opportunity and some others that you'll hear about later on through our video. We've brought Yearbook Club back, and so we now have students creating the yearbook and not just a staff member. 8 to 10 students are engaging in that on a fairly regular basis, and our student support team doing those student check-in, check-outs. Our Innovation for Learning team is a partnership. We meet once a month. Check-ins with Ryan Cox and his team have been fantastic. The teacher innovation group that goes along with that, I've got 4 or 5 teachers that is their committee that they engage with on Wednesdays to continue to push the envelope for technology and innovation within our building. That's where the conversations around modern classroom and blended learning have really taken off, and we're excited to see where that goes this spring. And these are just a few other call outs here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. Many of you have seen this already, but again, just all the many ways that we feel supported at South Junior High through the district office in all of the different areas and different initiatives that we have going on each and every day. And so with that, I'd like to leave you with our South Together video. You're going to see 2 individuals from South. The first one is Velva Pennington, our behavior resource specialist. She's also a licensed social worker, and she's doing some great things around mental health advocacy and Erica's Lighthouse. And then you'll also see Eric Dilla, our 7th grade counselor, also one of our leaders of our web crew, and he's going to go into greater depth of how that is a great support for South.
I got into education because my background is in social work, and I remember when I went to school in the district, the impact certain teachers had, and I wanted to do the same for our kids up here because my kids are in the district. I just felt I had a strong connection already. The supports we give for students is more of like encouragement. Sometimes, just like adults, kids have challenging days, and when that happens, they just sometimes need a little reminder of like, you know, you can do this. So when like I need to support in the classroom, I'll go up there and I'll talk to the student, and we can just process together what's going on. We usually go on like walks around the buildings, and they share with me what's going on. And at that point, I always give the student the option of, do you want me to help you advocate for what you need for supports in the classroom? Or can you do that on your own? Most of the times they do like me to like be around and like start that conversation, and they just like jump in naturally and they just say what they want. So the group we're doing here is called Teen Empowerment, and it's through Erica's Lighthouse. The purpose of that group is help them with having a voice around mental health and what that means, how it can impact our lives, and how it sometimes can make us feel like not empowered. So the students in that group, they have the empowerment to spread that awareness. All the ideas, how they want to get that message around the building, that's all done by them. Like, I'm just there to be that voice of what they need. Win time is to, one, help those students who are falling behind in class get caught up with their assignments, and two, to reward those students who have been staying on top of what needs to be done in the classroom. They can choose to work on more work to stay ahead of their assignments, or they can join me in teen empowerment.
So I got into education 8 years ago. I graduated from St. Cloud State in the school counseling program and got hired in August to be a school counselor here. I have an undergraduate degree in community psychology and just wanted to be involved in the schools for a long time and work with children. Web Crew is all about creating student leaders and empowering them to be leaders in our school and in our communities. Our very first day of school is just for sixth graders, and the Web leaders organize that, run small group activities with each of the sixth graders, give them tours, show them with their lockers, and just kind of eat lunch with them and have fun and let them get used to the school before all the 7th and 8th grade students return from the summer. So Web Crew helps bring South together through the leadership and being student voice for the South community and really advocating for what students want to see in our school, what changes they want to see, and really empowering them to be that voice of the students that maybe feel like they don't have a voice and say what goes on in their school day. This year we have Web leaders really took initiative and wanted to be involved in our community. They were asking what other projects can Web leaders do. So they asked if we could set up a time to help clean up the school campus. The Web leaders came to for 6th hour and went around outside of the school sports in the fall. And so that was all like a with that all on their own. And I had a student that in 6th and 7th grade had struggled with grades and attendance, and school wasn't always going the greatest for them, and they were interested in the Web program, so they applied, and when we accepted them, they joined. They came both days, but really became one of the bigger leaders in that group, always volunteering to help with things whenever we needed. And this student was always willing to do whatever we need them to do to help showcase the South community, which is a huge change because when they were in 6th and 7th grade, they weren't always doing what they needed to be and didn't seem like they wanted to be involved in the school as much as they had been, but gave opportunity to show their good leadership qualities, really helped them shine. In their 8th grade year, they ended up passing a lot of their classes, they turned their attendance around, and just became a great student. They recently graduated. So part of their success, I think, from school turned around when they joined that Web program in 8th grade and carried on through high school.
742 together.
742 together.
All right, and with that, that's our presentation. It doesn't call it out, I don't think, in there, but WEB stands for Where Everyone Belongs, by the way, which is a program that it goes through the same company that created Link Crew, which has been in the high schools even longer. So it's the middle school version of Link Crew, but WEB stands for Where Everyone Belongs. So with that, I take questions if you have any. Otherwise, I very much appreciate the opportunity to share about South tonight.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Scott?
You had mentioned PBIS, it's sort of a behavioral health thing. How do you choose the people that are succeeding?
Sure, that's a great question. We ask our teams, so our teams meet every week as grade level teams, and so we ask that during one of their meetings they collaborate and they nominate 3 to 4 students from their team, different students obviously every month, and then our grade level deans each hold on to one nomination too. So kids that they're working with and that they've seen progress with that might not always stand out in the classroom, but is doing better. Maybe it's a behavior improvement or an academic improvement that doesn't rise to the top. The deans also hold one of those nominations for themselves too.
Okay, and are they recognized more than once, or is it once a year that this happens, or?
Each student can be eligible once a year. Once they get chosen, we typically try to choose a different student each of the other months. Now, if a student does happen to get recognized through Student of the Month. They can also be recognized. We do something called Academic Achievers based on grade point average. Those students can be recognized for that each trimester on grades as well. And that recognition for us comes next week, one day.
Okay. Tell me about your yearbook.
Tell me more. What would you like to
Okay.
know?
Well, I remember we had yearbook when I was going to school, and you had a few students involved, and sometimes it worked out good, and sometimes it didn't.
Sure. So in my tenure at South, and I've been at South a long time, almost 16 or 17 years, 10 of those being as activities director, the yearbook was always put together by one or two adults. They took all the pictures, they did all the work, they put it all together, sent it off, and then they one thing that I wanted to do, because I was a part of yearbook in high school, and I enjoyed that very much, was how do we get more student hands and more student input in what that looks like? And so the incorporation of the win time on Wednesdays or Tiger time on Wednesdays has freed up that opportunity. And now we have time built in the day for students to engage in some of these other activities that wouldn't normally be as easy to engage in. When you're only going to meet once or twice a month, sometimes transportation is a little bit harder as opposed to coordinating a ride every day for sports. And so the fact that we now have time built into the day for students that are caught up on work or don't need to reteach has been really beneficial for us. And so we have, like I said, I think 8 to 10 students that are very eager to be a part of that. They love carrying around the camera. They love trying to find a way to stay after to take some of those fun pictures, and it's very much student driven now.
What is win time?
WIN stands for What I Need. It's something we've incorporated in all of our secondary schools. At South, it takes place in the morning for the first half hour, 35 minutes of the day. And students can do, the cafeteria of options really is quite long. Everything from reading a book quietly or doing some extra practice in math to, again, reteaching, making up a test they missed, work completion, music lessons. We've kind of got a long cafeteria of, if you've got these taken care of, because these are the most important, you've got all these other ones you can engage into.
It sounds different than homeroom.
It's incorporated through homerooms. So it's specifically our big win day is on Wednesdays, where we kind of pause our homeroom activities. The other 4 days of the week, we're doing advisory lessons and student check-ins and items like that. It happens at the same time, but specifically for reteaching and work completion on Wednesdays.
On the behavioral health stuff, do you have a special room for kind of decompression, or how does that work?
Yep, we've got a student support. Schools do. That's where Miss Pennington, who you saw, and then Miss Beth, they're housed out of there to support students all throughout the course of the day. We also have one for our special education students, and a person who is very much like Miss Velva, only supports special education students as well. Those rooms have sensory spaces, and they've got quiet spaces and reflection spaces for whatever that student needs to get refocused and back in the learning room.
Those are my questions.
Anyone else? Natalie?
Thanks for that great presentation. The video was very wonderful. So I have a couple questions, and they're actually in regards to the data deck. So it might be for you or it might be for someone else on the screen. I was really interested in the free and reduced lunch percentages from 2020 to 2023. So we had 63% in 2020 and then 57% in both of 21 and 22. And then 23 is 73%, which is a huge jump from any of the years that are on there. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, from the one thing I can say, and Donna might be able to share a little bit more, but through the COVID years, right, less people had filled out the free and reduced lunch
Right.
or educational supports paperwork. As hard as we worked through COVID to make multiple phone calls and mail paperwork and email, a lot of that didn't get done. And through the multiple ways that the state is now recognizing those students, some of it being very passive, we've seen the number jump.
Yeah, and totally true. Also, like, it's in the 50s or 60s going up to 2020, and I knew it would jump, of course, from last year to this year, but then it's really, 10, 15% higher than it's ever been at South, so that,
The other piece to that is Sorry. The other piece of that is we are over projection enrollment-wise. We were projected at just under 820. When I look today, we're at 882,
Yeah,
right? So
I
that's going to
noticed
also
that.
increase
Okay.
our, we're way high on enrollment just for this year versus last year. Well, we're very close to last year, but we're higher than we thought we were going to be
Okay.
enrollment-wise.
I was just wondering because, we've done a lot, I know the office, I was going to say the front office, but this place is called the district office, has really done a lot of work to get those percentages where they actually are. And so I'm like, is it a both and, or do we really have 10 to 15% more FRL students, or are we doing better at capturing those? And maybe that's an unknown really from,
Yeah, I can't answer the
Right.
specifics as to why.
someone behind you raised her hand, she might be able to answer.
Oh, can you? I can't hear her. Can you?
When we look at our data, the free reduced lunch data, we always can probably assume it's under by 1 or 2 points even when we're working hard to get it as accurate as possible. So, but this year we did get certification information from the state of families that qualified. So they automatically qualified without doing paperwork.
Yeah, and a big portion of that was a new pilot program that allowed Medicare to be a direct certification reason. And so MDE has indicated that that program, in terms of those students direct certifying in the future, will continue, but they're expecting us to see a pretty large drop in the number of students that come in through that direct certification because Medicaid had loosened their restrictions, and so
Right.
it was much easier for families to qualify and receive benefits during the COVID period. So MDE's prediction and what they're telling districts to plan for budget-wise is that there's kind of going to be a significant jump this school year, and they would expect that to level off next year. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw percentages that more closely mirror those 1920 percentages next year when that goes back to sort of a normal post-COVID environment.
Thank you. I knew there was something behind it, so now we know. There's lots of things. I just wanted to give you a shout out and your whole team for your attendance because every group has gone up, and some have gone up by like 15%, one group by like 40%. So I had heard rumors that you're doing great things about attendance, but then to see it in our data pack was really great. So thank you for your work there.
Just a fun anecdote, we did an attendance challenge for Try One. We just paid it off last week. The deans had the challenge of whichever group increased their attendance by the most, or the two groups that increased by the most, that dean was omitted from spinning the wheel of doom. Unfortunately, our sixth graders had the least amount of growth, so it wasn't really fair because they were already the top group, so they had the least amount of growth. So they actually lost the wheel, and Mr. Mitty had to spin it. We did it on a live stream. He had to eat a handful of the Bean Boozled beans.
Oh, no.
So we
no,
didn't,
those are
not
bad.
one, and we didn't know what it was. He grabbed like 15 and ate them all, and we have it all on video somewhere, so. Oh, sorry, Bean Boozled Beans, it's a game where you spin a wheel, there's two beans that look exactly the same, and one is a good flavor and one is a bad flavor. So you could get chocolate pudding or dog food, or coconut or diapers, and he ate 15 of them all at once, and we had that on the live stream. It was the highlight of the day, I'll tell you. The kids talked about that all day, so.
Well, I'm going to just say that in January, we should start doing that here at the board meeting. Thank you. I really think you're doing great work for our kids, and you remind me why I love to teach middle school. So thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. My question has nothing to do with it. Ago, we, as a board, voted to do a whole bunch of work over at South on our parking lots and traffic, and I would like to hear from you. How has that worked out? Have you had any positive comments, negative comments, and what would you have done differently, or what's really working well?
All of the above, right? I mean, the improvements, I haven't heard anything negative. I haven't heard anything negative. The improvements have been fantastic. Comments from our neighbors, which there are a handful I talk to on a fairly regular basis, being such a tight-knit little community there. But just alleviating the amount of parking on the road, our visiting friends from the neighboring towns, the appreciation of having parking lots, where if you come over, you can have everybody not walking blocks away. We had our sixth grade concerts, Assistant Superintendent Nelson was there. We filled the bleachers. We had almost 1,000 parents at our sixth grade and beginner music concerts. And the fact that we had almost nobody parked on the road is just such a positive for us. And so, you know, I don't think family pickup or drop off at any school is like super fun to be a part of. You know, I've got a daughter in the district, I've got a son in another district, and when I drop him off, it's not great there either. So I think that's always a challenge, but it's absolutely infinitely safer for our kids, that parent or family pickup and drop off, doing it in the old bus chute, and keeping those students from getting picked up on the road has just been such a positive for us, and we've heard nothing but good things. So.
Just follow up from last time, the walkie-talkie system thing, sounds like others have adopted that. Is it still being utilized, same rate, same intensity?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're super users of the EduClimber support request, which is again utilized to support teachers in the room, minimize walkie-talk in the building. Yeah, I mean, we just continue to find ways to collect that data, use it to make informed decisions, and our teachers continue to really rave about the level of support it's made them feel in the classroom. Yeah, I'll always go back to one of my very first meetings as an administrative intern 6 years ago with Marcia Bache, and we were talking about office referrals, and she always said, I feel like office referrals are actually requests for help or intervention, right? And that's really what we've implemented now, right? It's not going through Skyward and a part of that student's record forever because they had a cell phone out on the first day and they wouldn't put it away, right? A teacher is able to put in a request. It goes to our whole team's email or cell phone. Someone says in a minute, I'm going to go help out. And in 5 minutes, that kiddo's back to learning, right? It's a request for support. And that's really what we've been able to implement at South.
Hey, Joel. Great presentation. What I want to say hasn't talked much about himself in this presentation, but what I think we see reflected in this conversation is the way that Joel marries heart and structure. Joel led the PBIS team at South for many years prior to coming into administration and even during administration. And we see some of those skills around identifying problems like attendance and then putting creative solutions in to address them. He still, unlike some of our principals, he still leads MTSS and is there every week hearing about our students who are struggling and working directly with that team to set interventions to make sure that every student is successful. And then the heart just shines through all of that as well as the fun. And so South is a structured and joyful and calm place to be. And I think that that is due to your leadership, Joel. And so I want to say thank you for that.
Thanks, Joel. It was great seeing you. Appreciate your time tonight. Okay, next we're moving on to our second information item. We have the presentation of final levy certification presented by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Good evening, Chair Hawes, Superintendent Putnam, members of the board. Let me just take 1 second and get my presentation up. There we go. So tonight is the last step in the approval of the 2022 payable 2023 levy. This is the same levy that would have come to the board in September for preliminary approval. This levy is for taxes that will be collected in 2023, and then they will be actually recognized in the 23-24 school year. So the levy process works quite a bit in advance, but that's the way it works with the fact that we're on a fiscal year and levies are levied on a calendar year. The levy is split, as a reminder, into three different funds or funding sources: general fund levy, community education levy, and debt service levy. And again, none of this is new information to the board, and we would have reviewed all of this in September. In terms of how the funds split out between those three categories, the majority of that is in the general fund levy. So that is about 56.6% of the total. That is down a little bit from that percentage last year, as is community education, down slightly. That's about 3.5%. And then the remainder of the levy is debt service, just under 40%, and that is up slightly due to the district issuing the facility bonds for the HVAC projects. So the total dollar amount for the 2022 pay 2023 levy is increasing from the previous year. It's about $32.8 million this year, which is an increase of just over $1.6 million, or 5.15%. And we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation as to why that increase. So part of the presentation tonight is to comply with our legal requirement for a truth in taxation presentation. As part of that requirement, we have to review current year budget. So again, this isn't new. This is what the board would have approved in June. So not going to spend a lot of time going through this. It is in the packet. This slide shows the total revenue and expenditures for the district, total expenditures for all funds, just over $195 million, with about $163 million of that being in the general operating general fund. The way that breaks down as far as revenue, as you can see, the largest portion, I apologize, it's a little bit hard to read, but the largest portion of our revenue comes from state aid, and that's actually down slightly due to the shift in some of the funding between state and federal, with compensatory being down and federal funding being up. But as you can see, our property taxes make up just about 16% of total revenue, so really a relatively small portion of the district's total revenue. And then expenditures by fund, again, about $195 million in expenditures across all funds, with the vast majority of that, about 84%, being in the general fund. And then we can look at how that breaks down by program. Just as a side note, when we look at that $163 million, I want to recognize that there's a fair amount of COVID spending in there across all programs. There's a significant jump in sites, buildings, and equipment compared to what we would normally see because of the HVAC project that's coming out of COVID funding. But we really see increases in a lot of those categories. When we look at last year, the preliminary budget that was approved prior to adding in a lot of the COVID fundings, we were at about $148 million in expenditures. So you can see a significant increase there with those funds available. And then this is just a visual representation. Those three on the bottom right, bottom and left sort of quadrant are our instructional categories. Special education, regular instruction, vocational. That makes up about 61% of our total expenditures in those direct instruction. And that is down slightly. We would typically see that closer to 65%. But again, we have increases that are sort of outside of normal operating because of the COVID funding in sites and buildings, as well as instructional support and pupil support, with some of those either one-time purchases or additional support positions that we've been able to add with those funds. So moving back to the levies, in terms of how levies are determined, the authority for the levy is all set in statute by very specific formulas, and then can also be voter approved. School district levies are a little bit unique in the fact that that statutory formula gives us a dollar amount, whereas when we look at cities and counties, they set a tax rate and then apply that across taxpayers. We set a dollar amount and then spread the dollar amount across taxpayers. So we'll see in a little bit when we look at what has happened with market values, unlike a city or a county who will see a significant growth in revenue because of increase in market values, we don't see any new money when market values increase. So here's a review of the general fund levy. Again, this looks very similar to what was presented in September. It did go down slightly and sort of across a number of the categories based on enrollment adjustments. After we knew what our September enrollment looked like, we made some adjustments there. But really the majority of the increase is coming in the long-term facilities levy, which really isn't related to the bonds for the HVAC projects. It's really related to the way that the LTFM formula funds as enrollment goes down. The aid portion of the revenue goes down and more of that shifts to levy. And the same thing happens with average building age. So as we saw the old Tech High School drop off, and we had a 100-year-old building be replaced with a building that's 1 to 2 years old, that is shifting more of the LTFM overall budget from aid to levy based on the way that that calculates. And then the other significant piece of the levy that's increasing is on the building lease levy line, and that is based on a prior year adjustment in last year's levy related to the old children's home lease, where we had levied the rent for that prior to us knowing that we were going to purchase our own building. So that's the main reason for the increase. Only other thing to note here, line number 1, referendum levies is 0. We do not have currently any voter approved operating referendums. Community education levy, again, a relatively small portion of the levy, down slightly from prior year. And the community education levies, unlike the general fund levies that are largely enrollment driven, are more population based and tend to be fairly consistent from year to year. And then the third component of the levy, again, debt service, is where we see the most significant increase due to the funding for the HVAC projects. So in total, 5.15% is the increase. Again, that's less than what was presented as the proposed increase in September, which was presented at 5.48%. And then we'll also just look at kind of a 5 or 6 year here presentation. You can see both the general fund levy and the debt service levy increasing for the current year shown in red, as we just discussed. But overall, the levy has been pretty nominal increases over the years presented in total, which is shown at the bottom there. So the main variables in terms of tax increases and decreases, really the number one factor in terms of an individual taxpayer is going to be changes in market values. There can certainly be other things that impact. There isn't anything in this current levy that's new. There's no new programs that were authorized. We don't have any voter approved referendums that are showing on our that have come since the preliminary, either operating or capital. But certainly those could be things that would result in an increase or a decrease in the levy from year to year. Again, changes in market value, the biggest. We don't, I believe, have anyone here to speak this evening, but we do always want to mention that we are determining market values. Those are set, those come from the county. They aren't something that we have any control over. And so we just want to point that out. So this, I think people are well aware what has happened to the property market in the last year, but this shows a 20-year history of the market value and tax capacity. And you can see those are some pretty significant percent increases. We're looking at about a 16% increase in market value and tax capacity, which is the largest increase in the 20 years presented. We certainly are well aware, and unfortunately, again, we don't generate any additional revenue based on that increase. And this, so this basically shows with that 16% increase, you can see since we set a fixed dollar amount, we're really on a $200,000 house who is recognizing that 16% increase in valuation. Their school portion of their taxes is really only going up 7%. Whereas, if we set a tax rate, you would typically see their tax liability increase at roughly the same percent as their valuation, or maybe slightly lower. If there were a scenario where somebody's property value didn't change, it stayed at 0%, which I suspect is unlikely in reality in the marketplace today. But just as a hypothetical scenario, if there was a 0% change in market value, that same $200,000 home, that taxpayer would actually see a 9% decrease in their tax liability related to the school portion of taxes based on the dollar amount that we're levying. And then one last item that we always like to look at is how do our taxes on a $200,000 home compare to our surrounding districts. And so you can see St. Cloud is the bottom of that graph. And so we have been and continue to be the lowest dollar amount in terms of tax liability compared to neighboring districts. So that is all I have, unless there's questions. Otherwise, we would move to public input and then for approval.
Does anybody have any questions? Scott?
More about a operating capital levy. I mean, we don't have any referendum generating operating money. What's an operating capital levy?
So the operating capital is really just a portion of the per pupil local optional revenue that we get. It's the same thing on the aid side. So when we look at our per pupil allowance, a portion of that gets mandatorily by statute set aside for operating capital. The same is true for the levy. And so that portion of the funds has to be spent on things that meet the definition of operating capital. So things that have a useful life beyond a year, aren't consumable. Technology generally is allowable within that. But there's just a little bit more restriction on that and generally can't be used for salaries or staffing.
Okay. A while ago, we had I went to a presentation, I think it was SEM, manufacturing over at Apollo. And they had spoken about some of their teaching costs being covered by a levy. Tell me about that.
Yes, so if we general fund portion of the levy, that actually shows up on line 8, and that's the career and technical levy. So we're able to capture 30% of the salaries of those teachers. And so you can see the current proposed levy is just under $500,000, which is a pretty big increase from the previous year, which was about $405,000. And so part of that is directly related to increased enrollment in CTE courses. So as we have more sections, we have more staff, and we are very diligent as a district about ensuring that all of the staff who are teaching those courses have the proper licenses, or that we get a special permission from PELSB so that we can maximize that revenue.
I understand that St. Cloud State is teaching a career and technical education license. Is that, and if you have that, then you get the funding?
So you have to be licensed in the area of the course. So it's not like there's one blanket career and technical license that allows you to teach anything. But you can also get the funding even if somebody doesn't have an actual teaching program in that area. Pellsby, just based on the teacher shortage in the CTE area, will issue those license variances and special approvals based on sort of on the job experience too. So a good example of that is our foods programs. A number of our teachers currently and through the years don't necessarily have a traditional teaching license or background, but they have been professional chefs. And so we're still able to go through the process to get an appropriate license issued and still get the funding, even if they came through a non-traditional pathway.
Okay, in the news, I think today, the state approved money for people of color so we could bring up the percentage of minority teachers. Is that going to have any effect on your budgeting?
So it wouldn't have any effect on the levy. That would directly impact our budget is usually those are our competitive grant programs or allocations for funds. So certainly if we applied for funding and received funding, then we would incorporate that into the budget. I'm not aware at this point specifically which funding stream that might be, but certainly if that's something that we as a district choose to pursue, then that would become part of the original budget for next year that the board would see in June.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Zach?
And just for clarity, 3 sentences or less, when a taxpayer says, so am I paying more or less and how much?
So I would say that the typical taxpayer is going to be paying more. However, it's because of the increase in their valuation and not necessarily because we are increasing the amount that we're levying. The other part that's a little bit tricky is we look at that average increase at 16%. That is not spread evenly between residential and commercial. So statewide, residential property valuations have seen closer to a 25% increase, and businesses have seen more like a 10% increase. So what we're likely going to find in the actual marketplace is that a residential homeowner is going to see a larger increase in their actual out-of-pocket tax liability compared to a business. So, I know, sorry.
So, I mean, when I look at this, say, right, the chart, $200,000 home be paying about $53 more.
Yeah, so that $200,000 home would be the school portion. Again, we want to make sure that we specify that we're only talking about the school portion of taxes. So we don't want people to interpret that as the bottom line on their tax statement, because that obviously includes county, city, and school. But yeah, this chart would show, depending on where you're at. Now, again, this chart assumes a 16% average for both residential and commercial. You might see a little bit higher on the residential side and a little bit lower on the commercial side than what's shown on the graph. And of course, that can vary too, right? Because if you refinanced your home, you're more likely to have had an appraisal and might see a higher percent increase in your valuation than a traditional taxpayer if you did improvements. So there's so many variables in terms of trying to say a one-size-fits-all, this is roughly what an individual would pay, but it's going to be in that ballpark.
Well, I was just going to, you got it, I mean, you covered it there, but I was just going to say that the levy itself is going up 4%, a typical homeowner is going to see more of the 7%, and that's because of a shift in the valuation of the district to homeowners and away from commercial. Commercial didn't see anywhere near the appreciation last year that residential saw. So So the residential properties are picking up a larger percentage of the increase.
That's not something that's driven by us.
No.
Right, okay. Natalie?
I don't know if you know this or, and so it's just, I'm curious. So we always see that the folks in our district are paying lower compared to our neighboring districts. And we have 16% revenue, 16% of our revenue is property taxes. So is that comparable to other districts? Do they also have around 16% or is theirs more or less?
So it's really going to depend on the district. You're typically going to see that percent be higher at surrounding districts for two reasons. First, because if they have voter-approved referendums, which a number of districts do, that's going to drive that percentage up. And then also just based on the demographics of our district and our funding, in terms of having high compensatory, high federal funding for title and other programs, that's going to create a larger percentage in those state and federal categories than what surrounding districts with significantly lower free and reduced lunch might see. So it can really vary, but you're typically going to see St. Cloud be on the lower side percentage-wise compared to a lot of other surrounding districts.
Al?
Yep, and I'd like to add to that, that St. Cloud has a much higher commercial valuation than surrounding districts, so the residential properties, where I just said that they're paying a greater percentage because there was a shift to residential properties, but the residential properties as a percentage of the makeup of taxes in the district is much lower than surrounding districts. Other districts are closer, some are close to 100% residential, whereas we have a large commercial portion that picks that up, and that drops the overall tax burden on each residential property.
Okay, anybody else? Okay. We are required to provide an opportunity for the public to address the school board regarding the property tax levy. And so officially, I'll open that up at 7:34 PM. And keep looking, and there's nobody there. So the time hasn't changed, but I'll go 6:34 PM in 30 seconds. Public input is closed. Was that 30 seconds? Or sorry, 7. That's very negative, yeah. Okay, so then now we're moving on to the action part of this. Amy, want to go ahead?
Yes, so the total levy proposed for approval is $32,008,556.75. And so that's what we would be looking for board action to approve.
Looking for a motion?
I move that we approve the total proposed levy of $32,830,556.75.
I have a motion by Scott and a second by Zach. Al, can you please call the vote?
Scott Andreessen,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt, Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Al Dahlgren is yes, Shannon Haas.
Yes. Thank you. Looks like you're staying with us for a little bit more here. Next, we're moving on to another action item. We have approval of funding for McKinley Restroom Project, again presented by Amy Scallerud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Thank you. So this is a presentation for a funding request. So we'll briefly talk about the project, what it is, and why we're bringing it forward, and then talk about where the funding is coming from. So this project is proposed at McKinley Area Learning Center. They have one area of current student restrooms, and the proposal is to convert the existing room group restroom facilities into individual single stall toilet rooms. We want to be careful to not use the word stalls where it implies that there's a half door or a half wall, or you can see over or see under. These are truly individual rooms, floor to ceiling, fully enclosed, individual locking doors. And so that's a picture of where in McKinley the restrooms are located. If you're not familiar with the building, the main entrance off the parking lot is up here to the top right of the drawing. And the office then comes in on the corner of the building into the controlled entrance. So the buildings are on the opposite side, or the restrooms are on the opposite side of the building. So on the left is the drawing of the current layout that shows the proposed demolition of those current walls and individual stalls being removed. And then to the right is the proposed layout having individual, again, single individual toilet rooms. So a couple reasons for the proposed project. First of all, the current restrooms were built many, many years ago and were built at a time when McKinley was an elementary school and have not since been updated or replaced and are really not right-sized for secondary students. So there's really a need to make it appropriate for the students. And then the second major driving force is safety. We did meet with students and staff. The students feel that the current group restrooms create an environment that's unsupervised. It creates a potential to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It creates an issue with staff supervision and not being able to know what's necessarily happening in those individual large group restrooms. And so really the main driving force outside of getting it appropriately sized is from a safety perspective. In terms of funding, so the project is expected to cost approximately $400,000. However, we're asking tonight for the board to approve authority up to $450,000. We know this is a building that was built in the 60s. Is that right, Gary? 60s, 1964. So anytime we're renovating an older building, particularly a project that has significant plumbing, we don't exactly know what we might find. And so we would request up to $450,000 just so that we have a nice contingency. And the funding is coming from the McKinley Area Learning Center fund balance. So any revenue that we generate as a district from the ALC attendance and student, the per student funding that doesn't get spent on the ALC or ALC programs in a year gets maintained in a fund balance and can only be spent for alternative programming. And so that fund balance as of last June 30th had a fund balance of about $779,000. And so the recommendation is to utilize a portion of that fund balance for this project. Are there questions? So this is open. So these areas here are the openings to get in. What you see here is a half wall with sinks. So you can see over it. So there is a wall that would have sinks on the toilet room side, and then there's drinking fountains on the hallway side on the opposite side. Right here would be drinking fountains on the opposite side. But it is a half wall. It's not a full wall, so you can see over it in terms of supervision.
Long time coming. Anybody have any questions? Scott?
Can you tell me a little more about safety issues? I mean, we can resize fixtures in the same structure, but what are the safety issues that are driving this change?
So there's a couple of things. There's certainly across all of the state, there's issues with students vaping. That's one thing where it's not supervised. You can't tell how long, students are in there. Another concern is also just having flexibility for students to move in and out of restrooms quickly. When you have group restrooms, there's a tendency for students to gather, and then it's harder for students to move in and out, or they just tend to stay in there, right? And nobody knows they're in there. Absent having an administrator who can constantly go in and out, there's no way to tell if students are just gathering in the restroom versus being in class where they're supposed to be. One of the feedback that we got from students, there is one restroom right now that's an individual restroom on the other side of the building. The majority of students said that they're all using that one. There'll be 8 students in line for that restroom, and these restrooms will be open. Just because they acknowledge that a student might go in there to vape or to do something that they don't want to get associated with that wrong place, wrong time sort of a thing. So the students right now are really using the concept, but they have one of them. And so they're not able to get in and out of that one individual restroom during their passing time. And so then they're being late for class, and it's just not an ideal situation.
And I'd add to that, Shannon had asked about those half walls. It creates an openness, and there are mirrors in there, so that for adults, it creates a ability to have some passive supervision, just some really good sight lines.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're looking for a motion to approve funding for the McKinley restroom project in an amount not to exceed $450,000.
So move.
Okay, I have a motion by Scott and a second by Natalie. Al, can you please call the vote?
Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Shannon Haas,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt. Al Dahlgren is yes.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, moving on to our next action item. We have approval of high school course catalogs presented tonight by Lori Posch, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, as well as Jessica Moore, Director of Secondary Curriculum. Welcome.
Good evening, Superintendent Putnam, school board members, and assistant superintendents. A few weeks ago, I brought forward to you new course proposals with the understanding that we would be bringing the next step forward, which is the high school course catalog that needs approval from the board. I have with me tonight, and I'm going to reintroduce her because she has been here before, Jessica Moore, who is our Director of Secondary Curriculum. And Jessica has worked real closely on our high school course catalog, working with our counselors, our teachers, and members of many of our departments. So you saw a preview and you've had the link. Jessica's going to show you a few of the highlights tonight before we ask for approval.
Perfect. Thank you, Lori. Sorry, I'm tall. Thank you. As Lori mentioned, you guys approved some new courses, so let me show you where they would live in this new catalog. A student, when they start registration, they would go into course catalog. There's multiple things they could look at, but if they end up going down into special programs, and they may go there now from their electives, they may go there from their registration sheet. Some of the courses that you guys, cosmetology, intro to nails, intermediate nails, you enforcement and public safety too, which means we had to rename law enforcement and public safety just by adding a 1 to it. But now students, if they like the first class, can go on and take the second one and dig deeper and learn more about the law enforcement and public safety. They also can go to it just by electives by grade. So knowing that law enforcement and public safety is in 10th, 11th, and 12th, I'm going to hit our 11th graders. Here's a list of all the elective courses that students can take. Law enforcement public safety is right there. We have the hyperlink to special programs up here, so they can get right there. We also have a hyperlink to the college and career academies. So if they want to dig into the college and career academies and learn more about the different pathways, there's a whole website that they can dig into. Another new piece that we have this year is our Central Minnesota Virtual Academy. So we created a whole different site for Central Minnesota Virtual Academy to allow for students to see what are the courses that are available in this program. We split them up this time by high school and middle school, knowing that middle school courses are also available here. And students would do the exact same thing, swing in and see what courses that they can take. One thing, just like in our other program, we are making sure that students can take every course that they would need to take to graduate. So our Language Arts 9 now became Online Language Arts 9. We were very creative with our naming. Same for 10 and 11. And then our online 12th grade options are mass media, professional writing, and short story literature. Now, the teachers met and went through and talked through which courses they felt would work best online, knowing that we needed to make sure we were meeting grad requirements. And they spent a lot of time digging into this work, which then got brought forward to principals and to other district leaders to make sure we're meeting all the requirements. And it's short and sweet, but that's the catalog in a nutshell. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions or comments? Al?
Madam Chair, I would approve, or move that we approve the high school course catalog.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Al and a second by Natalie. Any further discussion? Al, can you please call the vote?
Al Dahlgren is yes. Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt, Shannon Haas.
Yes. Thank you, guys. We recognize a lot of work went into this.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving along here to a discussion item. We have student voice to the school board presented by Superintendent Lori Putnam.
Thank you, Chair Haas, members of the board. Good evening. Those of you listening from home, good evening. Our administration was charged by this board to consider the ways that you may be able to get input from students to be able to hear their voice on specific issues or just in a sustained way. We did speak about this, July perhaps. Time flows funny now. I believe it was this summer, and we talked about what that could look like. And some of the conversation was around, do we want students, did you want students sitting at the table? And the board at that point was leaning towards no. The other option that we presented was to get input in another area or through another mechanism. And so that's the choice that our administration really dug into. And so tonight you'll hear our recommendation for your consideration. Of course, this is your decision, and we are happy to do as the board wishes. But tonight you'll hear our recommendation. There are numerous opportunities for our students to give their input and for the board to hear that input. Oh my goodness, there's a T drop down onto the superintendent. So here we wanted to share with the board that currently exists for you and for others to hear student voice. First of all, I do student listening sessions once a trimester in our high schools at Tech, McKinley, and Apollo. We use a similar structure as what I use with our staff and our community. And that's, what do you need us to know? What do you want support with? What should we slow or stop? And what are you excited about? And our students give us that feedback. We theme it. By we, I mean Brian. And so Brian Hearn, if you're listening, thank you very much. Brian themes it for us. I review that feedback with administration, both building and district level, and then we decide, what are the themes, and are there steps that as district administrators we should be addressing? And then as buildings, what are you going to address? And then I follow up with those students. And so it's a cyclical conversation between me, building administration, and students. our principals are doing that on a more regular basis. They meet monthly, both at middle school and high schools, even a few elementaries have joined in that fun. And so they have ongoing relationships and ongoing communication with students through advisory groups. We do have our Imagine 742 open. Those of you who are in our district and listening, voting opened. And it's been really fun to watch students put their chips into the ideas that they wanted to move forward, and staff are doing that. And so there's been some really neat online conversation as students put forward ideas, and then other students either celebrate those ideas or like, not so much right now. And then the top ideas will go into testing phase with students and staff. And so there was a very clear pathway for students to make actual change through their own ideas. Thanks to Assistant Superintendent Nelson and her team, we are doing student summits this week, hopefully. They were scheduled for tomorrow. We had one scheduled for Thursday, and there is one scheduled for Friday, where we were bringing over a couple hundred students from our middles to Apollo and our South kids to Tech, and as a 6-12 system, and McKinley was going to split as a 6-12 student body. They were going to tackle some big conversations like, what does a safe and caring climate and culture mean to you as a student, and what are you willing to put in to make those things happen, and then some other topics that students and administration have brought forward. And then, of course, by board request, as you heard from the students of the State High School League conversation, and we are sure happy if there are other things, maybe perhaps the student handbook or the family handbook that you have interest in gathering student feedback on, that would be another way to get voice. So given all of the numerous opportunities, our recommendation to this board voice flow from students to building and district administration, and then to the Board of Education. I would be glad to provide updates in my superintendent report. Again, if there are specific issues or questions at hand that you want us, Assistant Superintendent Nelson, to gather students to come to the board to give input on those, would be happy to do that. Of course, you can go in to see the Imagine 742 feedback at any time. And so for us, this makes sense in terms of providing you with both and a broad scope of feedback from student voice. So that is our recommendation. We certainly welcome any questions about that recommendation, or if you have further direction for us as an administration, we welcome that also. Thank you.
Scott?
Your superintendent listening sessions, is that similar to your coffee with the superintendent?
Yes, they're the exact same format.
Okay. Imagine 742, I had heard that there was an end date on that. Is there an end date on that, or how's that work?
Here we go. The end date is relative to phases. So there are 4 phases where there's ideation, where people can dream up, students can dream up ideas and put them forward. There's a voting phase where students say, yes, this one not so much right now. Then there's the testing phase where they say, okay, we want to try, one of the big things that we're hearing is parking fees. They want us to look at parking fees. And so maybe there's a group of students and administration who are working on parking fees and really digging deep to understand why they're there, what are they for, what happens if we get rid of them, unintended consequences, and then making a recommendation that would, of course, then have to come back to this team. But that's that implementation phase, or that's the testing phase. And then if they decide to move forward, then there would be the implementation phase. So each of those are time bound, but it's cyclical, and then the process repeats.
That's it.
So this is a recommendation, and it's not an action item, and it's never been an action item before, right? So you just sort of, we're loosely just moving forward, right? Because we're not voting on anything, and if we have concerns, we could talk to you about it. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Natalie?
It's kind of like you're telling us what you're already doing because you've been doing this for quite a long time and even stepped up some of, with Imagine and stuff like that, y'all are doing a great job about it. So I like your flow chart. I think that makes sense. And thanks for really diving into it and putting into practice what you preach. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Then we are moving on to another discussion item. It's the board retreat agenda. And everybody has their calendars marked, hopefully for January 26th, 2023. We are at Quarry View. After some discussion, we're looking at allocating about an hour and a half to the Apollo referendum, probably precisely an hour and a half, trying to keep moving our topics along, and an hour and a half for long-term space facility needs, an hour for role of the school board liaison, an hour for state of the district department update, and lastly, an hour for meeting norms of personal interaction. So, does anybody have, are we good with that? Anybody have any comments or questions? We're good? So we're going to move forward with that? All right. And again, that's not an action item, we're just nodding heads. All right. Way to agree. Okay, moving on to some policies. We have, I am retreated, okay. Board Policy 211, it's the second reading, criminal or civil action against school district, school board member, an employee or student. And Dr. Mike Brevard, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education.
Good evening, Chair Haas, members of the board, Superintendent Putnam. From our last meeting, there was no suggested changes. This is our second reading. Are there any concerns, additions, or subtractions that we wanted to discuss this evening for 211?
I think we're good. Thank you. And we're going to jump over to Kay Nelson, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education. She is presenting Board Policy 212, School Board Member Development.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Haas, Superintendent Putnam, board members. This is the second reading of Policy 212. At the last meeting, you discussed striking the first sentence in letter A and just leaving the second part there. The items highlighted in yellow, you had reviewed last time and I believe, felt comfortable with those changes.
Does that look good, like we discussed? All right, thank you. Back to Dr. Mike Rivard. We have a first reading now, Board Policy 213, School Board Committees, Proposed Revised Boards Policy 213, School Board Committees.
School finance management and development. I thought there was a third item too, that the statute requires that we get training in. There's,
That line is straight out of the statute.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the MSBA offers 3 courses, if I remember right. Oh, you have 4. Okay, thank you. So.
All right, thank you. Then we're going to, did I already read this? I don't know. Board Policy 213, First reading, proposed revised board policy, school board committees, presented by Dr. Mike Rivard, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education.
Thank you, Chair Hawes. The school board committees was last revised in 2020 in September. Purpose of this policy is to provide for structure and operation of committees or subcommittees of the school board. Looks very much like the MSBA model policy in terms of Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2 as you move down through all A through F. I certainly can, or excuse me, A through H, we can certainly go through all. What we are asking for in a revision is in terms of the appointment of committees. It's a simple revision. The name updated on 3/8 of 17 has continued to live in Board Policy 213. We're recommending to strike that out. It would be under number 6. The Achievement, Integration, and Equity was renamed back in March 8th of 2017. For whatever reason, in parentheses there, that has continued to stay within the policy. At this point in time, Board Development recommends taking that out. That it's been 5 years now. That's the only recommendation for revision.
Okay, anybody have any questions or comments?
We're just striking that state.
Number 6, the yellow part is the change.
I think it wants a comma underneath it. Oxford comma.
Right here. I didn't do that, Scott, but I appreciate Microsoft Word catching that.
But we don't want to get in that discussion because that's a heated one.
Any other questions or concern for Board Policy 213?
Okay, thank you. Next one, first reading, proposed revised board policy 213.1, school board appointments to district committees / organizations, again presented by Dr. Mike Rivard, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education.
Thank you, Chair House. Board Policy 213 goes through the appointments that happens during our reorg meeting, and this happens annually. Board Development Committee did make a recommendation to strike out the meet and confer along with the Infinity Online Learning Governing Board. Meet and confer, after conferring with Tracy Bowe, she recommended that we know that at this time the board chair is always on there in terms of the meet and confer meetings, and that it wasn't necessarily something that you would have to appoint a liaison for. So we weren't sure why it continued to exist in this policy. The second one, Infinity Online Learning Governing Board, at this time we don't have anyone on that governing board. Mr. Ganji used to serve on that in that role, but at this time we don't have anyone on the governing board. That was my understanding from Gary. And Gary, if you wanted to add any information to that, we certainly would welcome it.
The school districts who have have someone on the executive board of Infinity also have a board member Infinity board. I'm no longer on the executive committee of Infinity, and so we wouldn't have a seat on that board.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh, let's roll one more time.
I have a question. We're just now getting into this online Central Minnesota Learning Academy. Is that any relate to any way to this Infinity Online Learning, or is that something different?
Scott, are you talking about the Central Minnesota Virtual? No, it would not.
What is this one about?
The Infinity Online is a platform that students have been able to use in the past, and we still certainly are a member. And Gary can again jump in here if he thinks it would be helpful. We're still a member of Infinity Online. It's something that students may utilize for taking a course. However, it's not something that we have a person from the school district as on their governing board.
Okay, thank you.
The originally was a collaboration of, I think it was 43 or 46 school districts. It's gone up and down since then. It's a different organizational structure than the online learning that we're talking about within 742.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Moving on to reports. We have the superintendent's report presented by Dr. Lori Putnam, superintendent.
Thank you so much, Chair Haas. This is always, for me, an opportunity to speak to not only the board, but to our public. And so there are just a couple of things I want to cover this evening. The first is I want to talk a little bit about our communication regarding weather-related closures. So just for everyone's awareness, in the event of school closures, delayed starts, and early releases, St. Cloud Area School District 742 uses a wide variety of channels and communications for families and staff. We will send calls, texts, and emails. Please remember, families, you need to be, and staff, you have to opt into the text to receive them using the emergency function, which means that we'll notify families at all available contacts. So that may mean you get 3 or 4 calls if you have a work, a cell, and a home number. But we are really committed to making sure that our families get this information. In addition, we do share it on the district's website, social media sites, and our local and Twin Cities media. This week, we became aware that some of our families and staff did not get some of those calls, the automated phone messages. So we dug in, thanks to Ryan Cox and Tammy DeLand. They worked really closely with School Messenger, which is our platform that we use to push out communications to figure out what is going on, that some of our families who had the same phone number forever wouldn't have been getting those calls. Upon investigation, we have learned that a major factor is spam filtering, especially by certain mobile phone carriers. So whenever someone is pushing out a huge number of calls, we push out about 12,000 calls at once. Some of the carriers automatically believe that to be spam and will just filter that out. So what we're asking for our families to do is just a few simple steps to ensure that you're getting the successful delivery of communication. First, of course, we always want personal information current in Skyward, which is our student information system. And if there's save any email address with isd742.org as a save sender so it doesn't fall into your junk emails, your junk drawers in your email. And most importantly for your phones, if you would save our main number that we'll be calling from, which is 320-370-8000 to your contact list. If you go in and you make a contact with that number, that's the main line. You can see it on our website. That way your phone carrier won't try to block that as a spam, and you'll get our phone calls that way. And of course, there's also an opportunity to download the School Messenger app to your mobile device, enable notifications, and then you could get get it popping up from your app also. So we understand that communication, sometimes people get frustrated when we send 4 calls, and then people are frustrated, understandably, if they don't get a call. So we want to make sure that we are providing as much information to our families and to our staff as possible. And of course, if you've got any concerns about the communication, feel free to reach out to any of us at any point. And then, did you want to ask me? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Al. And then, switching to a sad topic, I just want to take this opportunity to extend our deepest condolences as a school district to the Boyk family. As you know, we lost one of our students this past weekend. Charlie was an 11th grade student at Tech, and his loss has had a tremendous impact on our Tech community, our school district community as a whole, boys crush hockey, and of course the entire hockey community in this area. And at the request of his family, wanting this community to know that services will be held for Charlie Saturday at Tech High School from 9 to 11 is visitation, and then his celebration of life will be from 11 to noon. And his family does welcome our participation in celebrating the beautiful life that he lived. So just wanted to share our deepest sympathies and that information with this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have Board of Education Standing Committee reports. I believe we only have one, Board Finance and Audit Committee, Chair Al Dahlgren.
Yep. Finance Committee met last Friday, December 9th. The first item on the agenda that day was subject of combining polling places for 2023. State statute requires that if you have any plans to combine polling places in the upcoming year, that you do so, that you make that announcement or apply with the state prior to the first of the year. The Finance Committee determined that we were not going to look at combining any polling places, so if there is, for some reason, we have an election this coming year, we'll have to have all polling places open district-wide. Second item on the agenda was the Apollo Stadium update, and Amy presented some proposed drawings. Call for bids for the site preparation will be brought to the board for approval on December 14th, which was today, correct? The actual installation of the turf track resurfacing will be done through joint purchasing contracts, and they'll be brought to the board in January for approval. And the third item on our agenda was the McKinley restroom project, and we voted on that. We had that discussion tonight and voted on it, so I'm not going to go through that one again. That was our Finance Committee.
Thank you. And last up, we have future agenda items. January board meeting work session topics will include communications marketing plan, staff demographic report, finalization of the board retreat agenda. Oh, okay, we'll see that one again. Schools update and policy readings. At this time, does any board member want to suggest a future agenda item? Scott?
Yeah, we're going to be starting a new trimester. Are we going to get an update on the number of students, et cetera, like we did at the beginning of the school year? I mean,
Are you asking for a demographic report?
yeah, that's it.
Sure, if that's what the board wishes. We've never done a trimester by trimester report. We could also put it in our written board update, but if you would like a full presentation, the board can certainly let us know.
When does Tracy come forward with her HR report?
January, yep, next.
So maybe it could be included in that? Is it included in that or not really?
I don't think so.
I don't know what you're asking for. What are we discussing?
The demographic report that comes out in September at the beginning, after registration at the beginning of the trimester. It'd be nice to see a new demographic report come out after registration at the beginning of the second trimester.
Are you talking demographic or are you talking enrollment?
That's better, yeah.
Okay, that's a
Enrollment.
different thing.
Okay, enrollment, that's better.
Enrollment.
Do we get that, or?
Enrollment, second trimester?
Would you just like us to provide that information in email? I can give you the count of students if that's what you're looking for, or if you're looking for a more formal presentation.
Doesn't need a formal presentation.
Be happy to provide that.
Count like we get it in September.
Be happy to provide that to you. Yep, thank you.
Natalie, did you? Nope, you're good? All right. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah.
I have a comment before we're done. I was just going to say it's like 8:15, and after about how many meetings that we've gone, almost 10 o'clock, there's only 2 people that aren't here tonight. Not saying, just saying.
Yeah, interpret that how you want there. Okay, so this is, meeting is adjourned for our final 2022 school board meeting. It is 8:15 PM. We will be back January 3rd, reminder, 5 PM for the reorg meeting, and January 4th, 6:30 for our first 2023 board meeting. Have a good night.